Awesome. So we're on 5-1. I'm going to pick up where we left off last time. We were near the bottom, and I realized, like, right immediately afterwards that, good, I'm glad I just reset anyway. I realized immediately afterwards that I had not messed up, but just put something where it didn't want me to put it. So just to recap, we were on 516, the riddle class. I forget the riddle that I used. Something about goldfish.
It was
Something about like rich fish.
well, the answer was goldfish.
Right.
Why don't you just like?
Funny riddles. Here you go. Let's see. I'm trying to think what riddle I used last time. Let's see. Goldfish? No. I'll have to use a different one. I'll just look up 30 riddles. Okay, I got one. It's pretty silly. So first, we need to look at this and look and see what's required. It says using the person class, right? A riddle class, blah, blah, 2 instance variables. I think we had our instance variables. We looked up here from before, and we saw how, these were written up here. Our instance variables say that they're private, right? You have to declare what type it is. So it's a string. So I'll say in line 10, I'll say private string question, semicolon, and then private string answer, semicolon. Okay, then my my instance variables go to the top. I'm sorry. Instance variables go up here. Should have read. That's inside the constructor. We don't want that inside the constructor. We want to set question in line 12 right here. Question is assigned to init question. What's the reason why? We're assigning these to the instance variables that we can use throughout. And then answer is assigned init answer. Right? So those come in. And then it says print out the riddle question with system.out.println. So I'll say system.out.println. And what I need to put in here is the question. I wrote my question in there before. It was something to do with a fish. What's the richest type of fish or something? Right? This didn't want me to do that. So then here I would say system.out.println answer. Semicolon after each. Forgot a semicolon here. Semicolon in line 21. Semicolon in line 29. And it says call the riddle constructor to create 2 new riddle objects. So I'd say riddle, let's say R1 is a new riddle. And then what am I going to pass inside of riddle? Remember, in the constructor, there were 2 things. It requires a string, which is the question, a string, which is the answer. So first, that's the question. It's where would you take a sick boat? Where would you take a sick boat? Or a different riddle if you want. And the answer, get ready for it, just from a website, I didn't make this up, so don't hate on me, says to the doc. Ha ha ha. Okay. It says call and start to create 2 new riddle objects with the arguments for the riddle question. And so it wants me to create 2 riddles. Okay. So I guess I had to come up with a whole nother riddle. Riddle R2. Watch this. I'm just going to copy all this. Instead of R1, I'll say R2. And the first argument I'm going to pass in, let's pick another riddle from this list. Here we go, a computer one. Why did the fly never land on the computer? So I'll say, why did the fly never land on the computer? Guess I should have added a question mark in the first one. That'd probably be nice. All right, the answer is, what was the fly afraid of? He was afraid of the web. Haha. All right. And then finally, we'll say R1 dot print question. R1 dot print answer. And then we'll say R2. I'm just going to copy this. R2 dot print question and R2 dot print answer. Okay. Maybe I made a mistake in here. I don't know. Let's run it and see what we get. Where would you take a sick boat? To the dock. Why did the fly never land on the computer? He was afraid of the web. Okay. So walking through here, it looks like everything passed. You see that it all starts in the main method, right? I create a new riddle. So it passes this on to the riddle class. Before, when we used the turtle class, we passed on world. We didn't know what world meant, right? It says, where would you take a sick boat? To the dock. That then gets passed in to here. So where would you take a sick boat becomes init question, and to the dock becomes init answer. Once we're in here, we then reassign init question to question and init answer to answer. These are our instance variables, so we can follow them throughout the rest of the program. If we want to actually print the question, instead of writing system.out.println over and over and over again, you can just create print question. That's how like programming languages like Python have been designed to make things very condensed and easier. They take out all the verboseness of it, right? I could have named this print, and that would have been similar to the print function in Python, right? And we passed everything. Questions on that? Make sense? Okay. All right. I think this is the last one here. We got a couple questions afterwards. It's a long unit or a long lesson. In this unit, you will design a class of your choice that is relevant to your community. You will improve the class in each lesson of this unit. Okay. We suggest that you work in pairs. Now we're going to work together anyway. If you'd rather work on this project as one standalone lab rather than a piece at a time, then you can do this in 519. Let's just do it now. Okay, so it says make your own copy of this worksheet from the file menu. When I click on it, Oh. Okay. You can click on it. It says for question one for me says brainstorm and ask people in your community what will be important and useful to them to track in a community organization or activity to help your community. For example, you could create a Java class to keep track of community events, club activities, athletic games, or statistics, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Come up with the class name. Come up with at least 3 instance variables that are attributes. Let me click on 519 just to see. Takes me to 520. Yeah, I think we will. I think we can save 519 for now, maybe. Or we can save it until 519. Because this requires a lot of thinking here. And just throwing this on this, I don't want to think of something that's. How about we leave that one blank for now, and we can come back to this. The reason is this just requires some thinking. If we're going to be doing this all the way throughout the unit, I'm guessing some of you might want to choose different things. So I'll think about that. I'll do that one separately. So don't have to do 517. Okay. We talked about all these things in last lesson as well as this lesson. Instance variables, data encapsulation. It says the technique in which the implementation of details of the class are kept hidden from the user, right? Put things in a capsule. You ever done like a time capsule? No, you never did that? Where you like put a bunch of old stuff in a container and then you put it in the ground and dug it up years later?
Wait, I thought you do that like so you can see when you get older.
Yeah. So like you dig it up 10 years later. Or I don't know. When I was at Spalding, you like wrote yourself a note as a freshman and then you'd read it as a senior. Mine was pretty far off.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, where do you see yourself in 4 years? Yeah, I was pretty far off.
We wrote like a letter, but we didn't do like a time capsule. We're just holding it.
Yeah, like maybe like putting stuff from your time back in there. Like I remember we did something, I might still have it. It was like put your favorite CD in there at the time. Like you like, had to actually listen to CDs. If you guys even have them in your house still, but video games as well. I forget what else you put in there, like a list of your favorite things, and then you're supposed to open it up later. Time capsule. I think I have one for my daughters. I think they did one in kindergarten. It was like open when you're a senior in high school. Yeah. Consider the cat class, which will contain a string and an int attribute for a cat's name and age and a constructor. Okay. Which of the following replacements for missing code is appropriate? Okay, so we want a string and an int attribute for the name and age. Okay. And a constructor. Private cat name. Let's look at each of these. The first one, string name, int age. We have private cat. We don't want that to be private, right? We want, for our examples above, we used our constructor that we had was public, right? So we probably want that to be public as well. So we would say public. What's the difference between these two here? All three of them are private. These two are public. String int, public, string name, int age. What's the difference between C and D? Am I missing something? Oh, I see. The variables. So private private starting off. So private instance variables, public constructor. See if I'm right? Correct. Consider the party class below, which will contain 3 int attributes for num of people, volume of music, and num of boxes of pizza, and a constructor. Okay, so we want those to be private. It looks like 3 of the 4 are private, which is nice. So private, we have public party. And then let me read what the rest of this is. The start party method is intended to be accessed outside of the class. Okay. So we want to start party, make start party public. So private, public, public. Private instance variables, public constructor, and then also the start party is public. My guess is B. Let's run it and see. Correct. 11 out of 11 activities on this page completed. Attempted, completed, well done. Okay, go ahead and leave this, like I said, 517. We'll end up doing it later on anyway. So there's that. Or maybe we won't end up doing it. Maybe I'll skip it. I don't know. We'll get there when we get there. Okay, everyone's answers for that will be different because it looks like it wants you to spend some time thinking about it, drawing a UML class diagram. I think that'd be good to do. Just not sure if we'll do it in class. We'll see how we are with time. Okay, that's 5-1. Questions? We're good? Good intro to classes. 5-2. Someone came up to me. It was Greg yesterday. Said, hey, I have more questions about constructors. And I said, perfect, because we're about to talk more about constructors. Okay. In Unit 2, we learned how to create objects by calling constructors. I mentioned that when I was in college, I don't think my professor did the best job, or maybe I just didn't do the best job of listening. To be honest, some days I got to class in college, and I was just like, I'm tuning out today. I don't have the bandwidth. I'm tired. Played college soccer. I'd get back sometimes at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and then have to go to class at 8 a.m., and I just didn't feel it sometimes. So maybe they did do a good job explaining it. Maybe I'm just blaming it on my professor. But I never felt like I understood this properly. So with that, I want to take some time to make sure we understand it. Must be important considering we have an entire lesson on it. So it says writing constructors. In the first lesson, we kind of breezed over some things. We went into detail a little bit, and maybe some of the detail that I provided extra is actually covered in these and like reinforce it. And that's the way that a lot of these computer science classes works, where they'll introduce a topic and then either talk about it later or just like expand on it later and just assume, hey, just know these basics right now. If you're confused, that's okay. Hopefully by the end of the unit, you'll have a better understanding of it. Okay. You don't have to be an expert. Just, like the last unit was just to identify like the 3 pieces, the instance variables, the constructor, and the methods. Okay. To review, to call a constructor consists of the word new followed by the name of the class being constructed. Okay, so we're calling the constructor here. We're not actually writing the constructor. This is just calling it. So this is what we did in the riddle example, right? And it shows down here the turtle example, the person example. And it says, and then the argument list inside parentheses, right? All the arguments are being passed into it. You ever think public static void main, and then you see string and then args, right? If you look at your main method, I wonder if you have a main method we can look at here. Scroll down. Main method. Here we go. Right? You might look at this main method right? And you're passing an argument into it. That's what those parentheses are for. We haven't talked about what this square bracket means yet. We haven't talked about args, right? It says, for example, here's how we created world, turtle, and person. So remember, we created a new world, create a new turtle, and we put the turtle inside of the world. Okay. We then have a new person, and we passed it in different arguments. In this case, this didn't take an argument. The world didn't take an argument. The turtle took one argument as a variable. And this example, it took 3 all as strings here, right? So pat@gmail.com, and then this. Now inside the constructor, it's expecting a string, right? That's why, let's see if I have an example down here I can look at. I won't confuse you. We'll look at it later. This is expecting a string, expecting a string, expecting a string. If it's expecting an int and you pass it a string, it freaks out. It's like, this is not what I told you to do. Okay. So it says, now it's time to learn to write our own constructors. A constructor signature. In the source code for a class, constructors are usually written after the instance variables and before any methods. Okay. The signature of a constructor is similar to the signature of a method, except there is no return type. Okay. Not even void. And instead of a method name, the name of the constructor is the same as the name of the class. So if you write that constructor, I always wondered, I was like, why is this the same thing? Right? Well, it has to be. Can I change it? No. The constructors you write will almost always be marked public. Right? So in the last multiple choice question, it had a private constructor, right? It said it wanted to be public. So make sure we put it public. Like methods, constructors also have a parameter list. Right? All the arguments that are passed in are then received as parameters. Imagine you're shipping something and you put it in the mailbox, or you drop ship it, right? And it goes to where it needs to go as destination, and then it picks it up and then maybe reclassifies it, gives it its own tracking number, and takes care of it from there, in the same way that the argument is passed in is received, and some of the data points might be switched up. So it says, or what they're called. Like methods, constructors also have a parameter list specified in parentheses that declare the variables that will be used to hold the arguments passed when the constructor is called. Okay, so let's look at this. We have our public class name, instance variables, constructor. This is your constructor, has the same, it's public, has the same name as the name of the class. And then these are just some comments. Constructors have the same name as the class. Constructors have no return type. Just a reminder. The job of a constructor. Okay. So the job of a constructor is set to initialize values for the object's instance variables to useful values. You saw in the multiple choice examples before, they actually just named them the same exact thing. You're like, why did they do that? Well, you can do that, but we don't want to confuse, especially people that are seeing this for the first time. We want the values to be useful and make sense. I told you that in the example with phone number, email, and name, I was like, I would just use N, E, and P and then assign it to name, email, and phone number. But the more people that read your code and look at it, you don't want to confuse them. So sometimes it just might make sense, but sometimes you might want to add a little bit more effort into it. But what does useful mean? Sometimes we describe the values of all an object's instance variables at a given time at the object's state. Okay. As we say, an object is in a valid state when its instance variables have values that let us use the object by invoking its public methods. So another way to describe the job of a constructor is to set the object's instance values so that it's in a valid state and ready to be used, right? So are we able to look at what's being passed into the constructor and make sure that everything is assigned perfectly, right? Classes can have 0 or more constructors, but they should all produce an object in a valid state, okay? A valid state. Opposite of valid is invalid. We don't like invalid. If I get an error that pops up and says invalid something, I know I messed up. The easiest way to write a constructor is to not write one. If you do not write a constructor, your class will automatically get what is called default no argument constructor. This constructor will initialize all your instance variables to the default value for their type. 0 for int, double, false for Boolean, and null for all other reference types. Okay. If those default values are sufficient to put in your object, then that's fine. You don't have to write a constructor at all. Okay, but let's learn how to do it this way, so that way later on you're not like, wait, what? Like, I thought I passed. I thought I didn't need to do that. Why do I have to do this? Let's learn the why and the how, so then you can decide if you want it. Okay, usually, however, if your writing class has instance variables, you're going to need to initialize them, right? You probably need a constructor that takes arguments and use them to initialize your instance variables. This is what we did down here in the person class, right? These were passed in. So the argument was passed into the class. I received it. This is my parameter init name. Notice that this was string, string, string. If you tried to enter an int as a phone number, right, without any quotation marks, it would look at it and be like, I don't know what I'm looking at. It doesn't fit this. I'm very by the book. I have to make sure it fits. And then we took the instance variables name, email, and phone number, which are private, and assigned them. Init name is now known as name. Init email is now known as email. And init phone is now known as phone number. Now, what I used was someone hovering outside my door that keeps on peeking in. They either come in or they don't. Anyway, I used N, E, and P in my other example, and that worked. And you can use name, email, whatever you want. This constructor ensures that all three of the instance variables, name, email, and phone number in person are initialized. So if I passed it in pat at gmail.com, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, right? Those would go in. So pat would go into name right here, init name. Pat at gmail.com would go into init email. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 would go into init phone. So that way that value init name would then be reassigned and called name. Init email would then be reassigned and named email. Okay. One important note, if you do write a constructor, Java will not generate the default constructor for you. Okay. So you're overwriting any sort of default. This is a good thing because it helps you make sure that instances of your class are properly initialized. Just get in the habit of doing it. It's good practice. Sometimes you'll want to write more than one constructor, so there are different ways in making an instance of your class. One reason to do that is to make it convenient to create instances from different kinds of arguments. This is called overloading. We discussed it very briefly in chapter 2, and it said, hey, we'll talk about this more in unit 5. Okay, so it says you might want to write more than one constructor. It's convenient to create instances from different types of arguments. For instance, suppose we are writing a program that had another class, address book entry, okay, which had getters for name, email, and phone number. In the program, it might be useful to write another person constructor like this. Okay. That might look foreign to you right now. You're like, what in the world is that? But it says, hey, from the address book entry class, we're going to go ahead and pass in an address. And then that will then go into the address book entry class. I don't know what the address book entry class looks like, but I'm assuming there is a public method called getName. There's a public method called getEmail, and a public method called getPhoneNumber. So what is a getter? You hear that? Well, you'll hear that used frequently. You can just write a method called getSomething. You can set it inside and then get it at any point. Okay, you can name it however you want. It's just a common practice to start with get in front of it. Might be confusing. Let's keep talking about it. Sometimes you might even want to provide a no argument constructor. If there's a valid object you can create without any arguments, you could write a no argument constructor for person like this. Okay, say name is assigned anonymous. If nothing is entered into person, and you're just saying person P1 is assigned new person, open and close parentheses, and semicolon, you didn't pass anything into it, you can just automatically like assign these values as default. Okay, rather than dealing with null, you can just default these. Let's say you're storing this in a database and you don't know it. Rather than breaking the program, you can just automatically just say, hey, if no one enters a phone number, then just say unknown. It's up to you to decide. This is actually a useful value to have, right? Some people just don't care and just put the null in there. Click on the lines of code that are part of constructors. Okay, so the class is name, so the constructor has to have the same name as the class. So here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any other constructors? Nope. This is my one constructor. Let's check it. Correct. My guess is this one's going to have 2. Oh, no, it doesn't have a second one. What best describes the purpose of a class's constructor? Determines the amount of space needed for an object. Names the new object. Return to free storage all the memory. Or to initialize the instance variables in the object. D looks right. We didn't talk about storage or space or anything like that. The following class defines a fraction with the instance variables numerator, which is on the top, and denominator, which is on the bottom. It uses 2 constructors. Note that the no argument constructor sets the default instance variable values to 1 rather than 0, since a fraction with a 0 in the denominator is not valid. Let's take a look at this. So I have 2 constructors. The first constructor says fraction right here, and with no parameters. Okay, so it just takes numerator 1, denominator 1. That's kind of like the default. Set your own default. So you can kind of think of it like that. When you don't add any parameters in here, it's just adding your own default. And then here, if you do pass in a numerator and you do pass in a denominator, it takes the instance variables that are private, puts them in there. And then there's a public void print and just prints out that. Let's see what else this says. It says, try to guess what it will print before you run it. Okay. So the first thing, it says, all right, let's go to public static void main string args. That's where the computer looks for first. So I see my main method. And I create a new fraction called f1. And I didn't pass any arguments in. But it calls fractions. So what it does is it looks for fraction inside of the fraction class. It sees this constructor right here and uses it. And it puts 1 in the numerator and 1 in the denominator. Okay. And then if I print f1, it takes 1 divided by 1. I don't think it actually gives the answer though, right? I don't see any operation being done. So just say 1 divided by 1. In this case right here, it says I would have 1, 2. 1 passed in as the first argument, 2 as the second. That doesn't fit here, right? Notice this didn't accept any arguments. So it moves down and finds a second fraction. This one does receive 2 arguments. Are they both integers? Yes. 1 is an integer, 2 is an integer. And nit numerator is 1. So it was called nit numerator and is now assigned a new value, a new variable of numerator. But numerator has the value of 1. Denominator has a value of 2. So the first one should print out 1, 1. The second one should print out 1 divided by 1. The second one should say 1 divided by 2. Let's test it and see if we are right. 1 divided by 1, 1 divided by 2. Okay, these are very easy, maybe useless methods that we're creating. So might just say, why don't I just say system.out.println 1/2, right? Great question. The following class defines a car with instance variables, model, and year. For example, a Honda 2010 car. I have a 2013 Honda. However, some of the code is missing. First, fill in the code to create a car constructor. Okay. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll say model, which is already written for me, is assign init model. Remember, init is just like initialize. So that's what they're using. It's not my convention. This is what they're using. And year is assigned init year. Make sure to add a semicolon after that. Okay, it says then fill in the code to call the constructor in the main method to create 2 car objects. The first car should be a 2023 Ford, and the second should be a 2010 Honda. Okay, so car 1 is new car, and the first string being passed in is the model, right? So it's a string model and then an integer year. So the model, the first one, is a Ford. And the second one does not have quotation marks because it needs to be an integer, right? A 2023 Ford. And the second car that I create is a Honda. Remember, Honda's passed in first, 2010. It very specifically, in my constructor, asks for a string to be passed in and then the year to be passed in. So a Ford, 2023, Honda, 2010. It doesn't go through the model, just the make. Ford makes the car. The model of the Ford is, I don't know, what's a model of a Ford? F-150, right? Honda Accord, right? That's where my stepmom used to have a Honda Pilot. Okay, run it. Cool. It ran. Advanced AP topic. Reference parameters. Okay, get ready to do something advanced. Okay, it says when you pass object references as parameters to constructors or methods, those references refer to the same objects as the references in the caller. Okay, if the objects are immutable, like string objects, it doesn't matter at all. On the other hand, if the objects are mutable, which means you can mutate them, change them, okay, meaning their instance variables can change after they're constructed, then storing the passed in reference in an instance variable in your object can lead to surprising results. If some other code changes, the object it will change for you. If some other code changes the object, it will change for you too. If that's not what you want, sometimes it makes sense to copy the object passed to the constructor. We're talking about all these things. It'd be really nice to see them and store the copy in the instance variables ahead. How to make the copy and will depend on the class of the object, but often you can just construct a new object with the appropriate class, blah, blah, blah. Okay. This is a visual. So we have a public class person. My instance variables are at the top. I have private instance variables, a string name, and address, which is ADDR. This assumes that the address class is already defined somewhere in the program. Now, if you're looking at this down here, we have our constructor, and we're being passed in these two things. But down in here, we have this. Once again, this is a bit advanced. I think they just wanted to throw this in there just for the sake of it. This is not something that you're going to readily be tested on right this second. We will add more to this and build on this as we go. The main purpose is we're creating a new instance of the address class, passing this in all in this instance right here, which I'm sure is confusing for you guys because I'm not sure why they added it right there. I think there's probably a better place later on to add that. Okay, so don't get hung up on that. Let's get to our programming challenge. It says we encourage students to work in pairs. First, brainstorm to do object-oriented design for a student class. What data should we store about students? Come up with at least 4 instance variables. Okay, what is this link? Whenever I skip, oh, it doesn't. Okay, it's not a link. Come up with 4 instance variables. What are the data types for the student variables? So this is where I get out my piece of paper because I'm not good at storing stuff in my head. So instance variables about a student. I'm not sure why it's not working. Use a different. There we go. Got a pen. Okay, what's a good instance variable? Something to know about a student. They're what? Their grade. Okay. What else? Something more basic. Their name. Age. So here's the thing. Let's be specific. Grade as in their grade in the class or grade as in their year? Okay. So I'll add a separate variable called year. Okay. Sorry, someone else said something. Name. I'll add like current grade. If that makes sense. I guess that doesn't specify either. So rather than having something ambiguous like that, maybe I'll say like grad year. So name, grad year. I'll say because then that's difficult too. I'm trying to be specific. Grade level. Okay, so would that be like honors AP regular, or would that be like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior? Right, so grade year. So I'm trying to find specific instance variables. So name, grade year, maybe I could, yeah, student ID. Okay, one more. Email. Okay, so those are my 4 I wrote down. Name, grade year, or grad year. Grad year. Student ID and email. I did that. So step 1, done. Write a student class below that has your 4 instance variables and write a constructor that has 4 parameters to set all of these. Okay. So write 4 instance variables. So I'll say a private string and we'll say name. Also have a private string grad year. Or to be even more specific, graduation year, because I wrote grad year and then I said grade year, which then made me think like, oh, your grade. So to be specific, graduation year. Private string student ID. Okay. And then private string email. You have semicolons after each. Cool. And then write a constructor. So my constructor will say public student. And what will we pass inside of student? We're going to call this string, ready for this? E, string G, string S, and string E. Typing out init graduation year, it just takes too long, right? EGSE. Oh, but what's the problem? NGSE. There we go. If we had 2 of the same, then I would just probably use like X, Y, or Z or something, you know. The second letter. What was something I was looking at the other day and I was like, why is that a shortcut for this? I don't know. It's like when people were coming up with keyboard shortcuts, right? Like Control C is cut. Control C is copy. Control X is cut. And then Control V is paste. Why would we choose V? Why would we choose X? Well, they're right next to each other on the keyboard. Control Z is undo. Z, X, C, V, right there, really close to Control.
But then why, because Control Z is undo, why then do Control Y for read?
Maybe you don't want it anywhere near. Maybe it's also because if I put my fingers on ASDF and JKL semicolon, like I should be typing, the Y is right there. Easy access. Okay, maybe, I don't know. All right, then let's assign these. So name is assigned N, graduation year is assigned G, student ID is assigned S, and email is assigned E. Perfect. Then what does it want me to do? Add a print method that uses system.out.println to print out all the instance variables. Okay. So if I write like system.out.println, it just wants me to print them all out. Oh, I guess I could just do this. Right? And then print out name, print out graduation year, print out student ID, print out email. It's very possible. Probably would save lines of code. Very possible. Just print them all out. Just making them each on each line. 1 line, 2 line, 3 line, 4 line. Could write a for loop that goes through. Create a list. Could. But I'm just trying to finish it. Add a main method that constructs at least 2 student objects. Okay. So construct 2 student objects. So I'll say student S1. It's just what I'm naming my student. Let's be nice about it. I'll actually give a student. No, I won't be nice. Never mind. New student. Okay, student 1. The student's name is Bob. And the second thing I'm passing in is the graduation year. So 2024. And then the next string I'm passing in is student ID. My student ID when I was in high school was 8164. And my email address, or Bob's email address, is bob@bob.com. Student, that takes too much work. Copy, paste, student S2, new student, Barbara, Bob and Barbara. Her graduation year is until 2025. Her student ID number is 4618. And we have Barb at barb.com. Then I can call each one S1.print and S2.print. Okay. So you think about it, whenever we're importing, think about like we're importing in Python a module, right? And then we're able to call things from it. Really, that's importing a class of a bunch of stuff that's already been created for us. And we just know, hey, by the way, when you use the print function from this class, or the print method in Java here, when you use the print method, this does something. Okay. It tells you what it does. In this case, it prints out the name, the graduation year, print ID, and email. So maybe your program just looks like this. And you trust that somewhere behind the scenes, student did a bunch of the work. But now you can write that class and write a bunch of stuff that can then determine what's done. Okay, let's run it. Let's see what we get. Done. Bob is graduating 2024, student ID, email. Barbara, 2025, student ID, email. Back to the design a class for your community. We didn't do that. So guess what we're not going to do again? This. Sorry if you're in like in a different school and your teacher makes you do this. You're gonna have to figure it out. Or we'll eventually get to it. I'm not sure. It's good to practice, but I also want to get through this material. Constructors are used to set the initial state of an object. I think we've dove a little further into constructors now. Hopefully this makes a little bit more sense. When no constructor is written, you get a default constructor. Okay. AP practice. Consider the definition of the cat class below. The class uses instance variable is senior to indicate whether a cat is old enough to be considered a senior cat or not. There's a senior dog sanctuary across the road. Then you guys have a cat? You guys have cats? You like cats, right? You love cats. You have a cat, Alec? Yeah. What's your cat's name?
Ninja.
Andrew? Ninja. Okay. Is it a boy or girl? Boy, is he old? Okay. So according to this, it's not a senior cat. It needs to be 10 or older to be considered a senior cat. So I have cat string n and then int a. So consider the definition. Considers below. The class uses the instance variable is senior. Okay, which of the following statements will create a cat object that represents a cat that is considered a senior cat? Well, it looks like in order to be a senior cat, it needs to be older than 10 or equal to 10. And the first thing that needs to be passed in is a string with the name of it. The second thing passed in has to be, well, let's look at this. Age. If age is greater than or equal to 10, I see. So this fools you here because this passes in a string. What's the second thing it passes in? String. Doesn't like that. String int, but that int is smaller than 10. True is a Boolean value, not an int. Whiskers 10. The answer would be D, whiskers 10. Consider the following class definition. Each object of the class cat will store the cat's name as name, the cat's age as age, and the number of kittens the cat has as kittens. I pulled up to school the other day, and there was a bunch of kittens by the dumpster outside. If I told you, not in the dumpster, but by the dumpster. I don't know where they ended up going. What's that?
I want a kitten so bad.
You want a kitten? It says, which of the following code segments found in a class other than cat can be used to create a cat that is 5 years old with no kittens? Look at this, N, A, and K. Love it. So the examples are, we want a cat that the first passed in is the age. So so A would be 5. But then no kittens. Well, if we look at this, the default, if you only put 2 in, the default to kittens, we have 2 constructors. So everyone take a look at this. 2 constructors. In the first one here, sprinkles 5, 0. Sprinkles gets passed into N. 5 gets passed into A, and 0. So 1 will work. 2 will not work because the cat is 0 and has 5 kittens. That doesn't make sense, right? So 2 wouldn't work. But look at 3. Luna is 5. So it looks for the constructor. This takes 3 parameters. So it wouldn't be this one. It tries to match up the parameters. In this case, it matches it up. N, A, it receives N as name, 5 as age. But look what it defaults kittens to, 0. So really 1 and 3 are true. Check it. Good job. Consider the following class. I have cat, the color of the cat, if it's hungry. Following statement appears in a method in a class other than cat is intended to create a new cat object C with its attribute set to black and true. Which of the following can be used to replace the missing constructor code? Okay, so that way this object is created correctly. Okay, we have okay, the constructor C we wouldn't want to assign it black in there. That means black would always override what was ever passed in. Okay. I'm not sure where these are coming from. So this is the best example down here. Color C is being passed in as a string. The condition Boolean value is being passed into H, assuming there are instance variables already created called color and is hungry. Okay, so my guess is E, correct. 10 out of 10 activities completed on this page. Completed, well done. What time does class end? 55? We'll start 3. We'll start it. Okay, 5.3, comments and conditions. We've already talked about comments before. Hopefully this is a breeze and we can just go through this and be like, we already know what comments are. Adding comments to your code helps it make it more readable and maintainable. In the commercial world, meaning like outside, like if you get a job and you want to work in teams, software development is usually a team effort where many programmers will use your code and maintain it for years. So if you're writing code with only like, you're writing variable names, instance variable names, and you're writing like P and E and M, you better write some comments in there, which might be extra work. So you might just want to, like, I always want to do the minimum amount of work, right? So maybe we just write, instead of writing vague instance variable names or just vague variable names in general, maybe we do write in the email, and that might make more sense rather than having to write all this documentation and extra comments. Up to you, but comments are an important part of all this. It says it's essential in this kind of environment and a good habit to develop. If you're just writing code on your own, no one has to look at it, and do what you want, right? If you're just independent contractor doing your own thing, people hire you to make websites. Sometimes people purposely make things vague so that way they can't get fired, right? They'll be the only person that understands it, so that way they can't hire someone else to do their job, right? That happens a lot in the government where only certain people know the password and they won't tell you the password. When I worked for the government, I had to like log into this computer every once in a while, and it was in a lab. I didn't know the password of the computer. So in order for me to use the computer, someone literally had to walk in, type in the password, and then leave. So if that person went on vacation, guess what? I couldn't do my job. And guess what happened? He went on vacation for like 2 weeks. Guess what I did? Hey, can you go ahead and do this for me? Sorry, I gotta wait. Wait, what? This person knows the password. Oh, they understand. They're like, okay, well, wait till he gets back. So I sit here 2 weeks. Right. You would think that would be nice and be like, I don't have to work too. It stinks because you're stuck there. Like, what do I do? Let me check. Oh, that's right. I can't use my phone. I can't bring my phone in the building. Guess what you do? You grab a book and you start reading the book. Let's read up on documentation here on this, right? It stinks. So, sometimes people will make things vague to keep their job for job security. But if you're working in teams, you want to communicate these things. Comments will also help you to remember what you were doing when you look back to your code a month or a year from now. There are 3 types of comments in Java. You have single line comments, multi-line comments, and documentation comments. The special characters, the 2 slashes, right, going from left to right, forward slashes, are used to mark the rest of the line as a comment. I use that as well to like comment out code if I'm not sure if it works, or if I'm like leaving everything the same so I can always resort back to it. You can comment out 1 line or multiple lines. So it says If the comment is going to be multiple lines, we use that / with the asterisk and then to end it at the end there. There's also a special version of the multi-line comment. This is called the documentation comment, which is very similar to the multi-line comment, only it uses a double asterisk. Okay. Java has a cool tool called Java Doc that comes with the Java JDK, the Java Development Kit, that will pull out all of these comments to make documentation of a class as a web page. Isn't that awesome? Right. So if you're writing something, people were asking me questions in the chat. Yes, I am familiar with the C language and the linked list concept. Yes, I am. With that, this tool generates this documentation tool. This is, for example, for the string class. Although you do not have to use this in the AP exam, it's a good idea and something that we'll reiterate moving forward. A single line comment, multi-line comment, and a Java documentation comment. Those are those three. Check it. Completed. Well done. The compiler will skip over comments and they don't affect how your program runs. They're for you, your teacher. You guys know all this, right? Easy stuff. So these examples here, this is a documentation, Java documentation comment. This is a single line comment, right? So it just tells you this keeps track of the max score. Sometimes too many comments just makes code harder to read. So some people over comment, which, you know, if that's the way you are, that's fine, then do it. But you gotta be careful not to over comment and make people not even want to read through your code. Public print. I have this, I guess I have this multi-line comment here, but only use it. You can use it as a single line comment, but in case you add more. There you go. Note that most IDEs will tend to show comments formatted in italics to make them easier to spot. In this case, you notice how it's an italic. Italics like gently slanted. There are some special tags you can use. Okay, so @author is the author of the program. Okay, @since, the date released. The version, parameter, whatever. Okay. Preconditions and postconditions. As you write methods in a class, it's a good idea to keep in mind the preconditions and the postconditions for the method and write them in the comments. A precondition is a condition that must be true for your method code to work. For example, the assumption that the parameters have values, and are not null. The methods could check for these preconditions, but they do not have to. The precondition is what the method expects in order to do its job properly. Okay. A postcondition is a condition that is true after running the method. It is what the method promises to do. Postconditions describe the outcome of the running method. For example, what is being returned or the changes to the instance variables. These assumptions are very useful to other programmers who want to use your class and get the correct results. Okay, here's an example of preconditions and postconditions. Okay, so my multi-line comment says, here's what this is about to do. The constructor that takes the x and y position for the turtle. The preconditions, parameters x and y, are coordinates from 0 to the width and height of the world. The postconditions, what's done afterwards, is the turtle is placed in the xy coordinates. Okay, parameter x is the x position to place the turtle. Parameter y is the y position to place the turtle. So then by reading this, you're like, oh, that makes sense. I'm going to use this. When I use this class, this is what all this means. you might be able to read this without any documentation and be like, yep, know what it means. But maybe someone new or someone looking at it for the first time, or maybe just didn't have their cup of coffee and just looking at it like, I have no idea what that means. I get caught staring at code sometimes that I should know what it means, but just don't. Especially at a long class like this, where you're just sitting here for 90 minutes just reading. Try to break the preconditions of the turtle constructor up below. Does the turtle constructor behave properly if you break the preconditions that x and y are between 0 and 300? Try giving the turtle. Okay, so let's look through this. Try to break the preconditions about the range and values x, y. Okay. So if we look back here, right, what does it mean to break these up? I have x position assigned x, y position is assigned y. We want to, I'm just reading through this. So I have my public class turtle preconditions. I have my main method. I have my world, my new world, 300, 300. That's how many pixels my world is, 300 to the left and right on the x-axis and 300 down. It says change 0, 0 in the turtle constructor to other values outside of 0, 300 to break the preconditions and see what happens. Okay, so if I say change 0, 0 to, I don't know, 400, 400, is that what it wants me to do? Okay, so it said my precondition was, hey, I'm creating this grid 300 by 300. And I said, nope, I'm not going to abide by you. The precondition of a 300 by 300 grid, I'm going to go ahead and move outside that grid and go 400 by 400, like where I want the turtle. And the turtle maxes out at 300 by 300 and doesn't actually get to go to 400 by 400. It maxed it out. What happened? The turtle ended up going as far as it could go. Says a turtle constructor precondition is that x and y should be between 0 and 300 in that case. If it receives values outside of this range, it sets x and y to the closest legal values. So it set x to 300 and y to 300 because it didn't know what to do. But luckily, there's a default there. It didn't break the program. Similarly, the forward method will not allow the turtle to leave the world. Okay, so if I were to put forward 700, it would go as far to the edge as possible. Consider the following class definition. Okay, which of the following preconditions are reasonable for the test score constructor? Okay. Okay, score is greater than or equal to 0. So I have, let me read through this. So I have student name, I have a score, and I have extra credit, EC. So let's see. S is less than or equal to 0. That really wouldn't make sense. So let's not click that one. The precondition of score should be greater than or equal to 0. Yeah, that's probably a good, you can't really get a negative grade unless your teacher really doesn't like you. Extra credit should probably also be greater than or equal to 0. I agree with that. N is not empty in string. Is not the empty. Sorry, N is not the empty string. Maybe I should say an empty string, right? I agree with that. It shouldn't be empty. You should know the student's name. And student name is not the empty string. I guess that would be good too. Check. Oh, I only need 2. let's see what it wanted. The precondition should be about the parameters of the constructor. Oh, I see. Okay. So we don't worry about especially E, right? And we don't worry about score. Okay. I'm not worried about these instance variables. I was looking in here. Okay. So N, whatever's being passed into N, S, and EC. So it should be C and D. Okay. Those would be right if it said S is greater than or equal to 0, or S is not the empty string. Okay. That would be right if it said that, but that's what they want, C and D. Okay. The following code breaks the preconditions of the substring method and throws an index out of bounds exception. So exception is like an error. Index out of bounds exception. Can you fix the code by changing the arguments for the substring method to print out the substring LO? Okay. So it would start at 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'd say the length, it would go from 3 to 5. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, I fixed it. It was -1 to 10. This was it started at 0, 1, 2, 3, and went to the string length. I could say do that too, right? That would work too. So either 5 or whatever the string length is. That's in case you add like extra characters in there. So I'll just keep it at 5 so I don't confuse you. It says the following method is intended to return the substring starting at index I until the end of the string. For example, get to end should return 12. Oh, I see. Starting at index 1. Okay, so 0, 1. Which of the following is most appropriate precondition for the method? Okay, let's look at this. Get I to the end. So I have string. Okay, the precondition should be I is greater than or equal to 0. When it should start. I is less than or equal to the string length. But then that would include negative numbers. 0 is less than. No, that wouldn't include the first one then. And 0 is less than or equal to I. But that wouldn't. Oh, I see. And then in between the string length. So anything between 0 and the string length. Let's check see if we're right. Correct. So this was right, but this was a better answer. Right? It's between. It's not greater than the string length. And we're able to determine what's between it. Okay, we're going to stop here at 5:33. We will pick up next class. Thanks for sticking in for most of this here. I know some of this is verbose and some of it's repetitive and some of it might be confusing, but we're going to continue to add to this over the upcoming weeks. Okay. Have a great Christmas break. See you guys.